Thank you very much, Jill, and thanks everybody for joining us. I hope you find this information helpful. Today, we're going to be talking a little bit about the buzzword, I guess you could call it, digital transformation for small businesses in the new normal workplace. And we picked this subject because I think, people hear about this term a lot, but they don't really know what it means. And I think it kind of clashes a little bit, or maybe not clashes, but aligns itself with something that's already changing, which is the new normal in the workplace in light of COVID-19. Most businesses are not operating the same way they were before the pandemic. And I think digital transformation is a part of creating a successful strategy moving forward. So we're going to talk a little bit about this, and this is going to be one of those webinars that's kind of a mindset webinar. So we're going to talk a lot about, how to approach the subject. The solutions are going to be very different depending on your organization. So anyway, let's get started. So a little intro here. So, today there's a lot more competition for many businesses. If you look at products and services, we're finding more commoditization by online alternatives, and this can really cost customers or force your margins down. Just consider, for example, grocery stores right now, right? It's very appealing, like for me, for example, to use Amazon or Instacart or some of these things to get groceries delivered to me. And I'm making this decision based on something that's convenient for me, not necessarily based on the product itself. The bagels I buy or the turkey breast I buy is just a commodity. It's the delivery that's changing. So as an extension, your value proposition is changing. So a lot of times it's not about the quality of this product or service you deliver, but the way you deliver it. Another example of this would be I had to get my air conditioning repaired in May. Just one day it stopped working, which obviously in Maryland as it gets warm is a necessity. And so I needed to get an air conditioner repairman out here, but I had to do this in a way that where the delivery was most important to me. I didn't want to have personal touch. I didn't really want them walking through my house as much as possible. I need to make sure they were wearing masks, etc. So of course I wanted the thing fixed, but what was also important to me was how that service was delivered. So one of the things everybody needs to consider right now is how do we deliver these services and products to people in a way that they value. That's going to be really important moving forward. So, and not only that, COVID-19 has forced businesses towards decentralized workforces. Just to give an example, we recently made a new hire, and this person lives in Texas. And the reality is that the way we work, we're fortunately to be in an IT services company where much of the things we do can be done virtually with a lot of technology and internet connections. And we're finding talent instead of looking, sort of the Mid-Atlantic, Baltimore area, we're looking broader than that. And so we have to have workflows and productivity resources that accommodate this kind of working. So right now, everybody needs to look for ways to evolve their business, and this sort of is the new way of working. Many small businesses, though, are sort of stuck in doing some of the key value tasks, the things that they've always done in an old school way. If you're in a, just to give an example, like a law firm, a lot of people who worked in law for maybe 20, 30 years are probably accustomed to a lot of paper, a lot of filings, even file cabinets, they still exist. But the new normal of working makes that very, very difficult. And so the idea of digital transformation means that we have to let go of the things that we were comfortable with, that were satisfactory before, and figure out how we can make these things, these digital things, a reality, so that we can continue to be productive and competitive. Otherwise, we're going to find ourselves not so. So anyway, excuse me. What is digital transformation? So digital transformation is, a simple definition is using new technology to change the way you do things. And so let's go through a few examples. So the most basic example is going paperless, right? It's nice when we can take a document scan it in, or maybe never even print it at all. Submit that document electronically to a third party. Maybe they sign it, maybe they send it back to us, maybe they make their edits, whatever, or do their taxes online. You know, when I did my taxes, I was given a W-2 by my company, but everything else was done electronically. I don't have a big file somewhere with a bunch of paper in it that has all of my tax returns like I have from maybe 10 years ago. So that's one big example. And really, if everything we're doing, if we have things that we're relying on paper right now, that's kind of a good place to start. Can we address that with digital? Another is virtual meetings. So again, speaking for myself and I think many businesses, is that if we want to have successful engagements, now we're having to do this virtually. You know, one of the things we use at DP Solutions is Microsoft Teams. I know some people use Zoom or other sort of things, but if I'm going to have a positive engagement, let's say we want to sell services to a new client, or I want to have a conference about how we're going to strategize their technology in the future, I might not be able to get all those people in a room. And so if I'm not able to do virtual meetings, then I'm going to find myself losing a ton of productivity, and and more to the point, somebody else is going to eat my lunch. They're going to figure out how to do that. Another great example is Airbnb. So obviously we've all stayed in hotels before, and it was very typical. Maybe you make a phone call or even do an online reservation, but you go up, you see the front desk person, you give them your credit card, you do all this stuff. But Airbnb is totally different. You do the reservation online, give all their credit card information. You might get a code to get into maybe it has one of those little key code things. You put in your code and get your keys to the place, and then you lock it all up. And you never meet the host, you never meet anybody. It's all just there. It's a completely digital experience where you never really interact with anyone. And if you do, it's going to be online. Digital check deposits. I have not deposited a check in a bank in many, many years now. I do it all on my cell phone. There's an app, I take a picture of the check, and it's deposited. Now, you know, and that's for the few checks that I actually have to deal with these days. It's hard to imagine doing many check deposits in person anymore. Online learning and training is a great example as well. You know, colleges and universities and public schools and all this stuff are really using a lot of more online learning. Courses that are done online, even lectures that are done online. This is a big digital transformation, and I expect this to continue. I don't quite know exactly when colleges and universities are going to open back up for, you know, lecture halls and things like that. But I would expect, just like anything else, is that even when we go back to whatever normal is, that we're still going to have an increased online presence for online learning and training. Another example is IoT, so the Internet of Things, smart devices that perform tasks that used to be done by hand. Do yourself a favor if you're ever interested and go online and look at, you can probably find this on YouTube, look at how an Amazon warehouse operates and how a lot of the tasks that maybe people assume are done with a person with a crane picking up pallets are done by machines that use QR codes to know where they sit and things like that. It's really incredible how many things can be gathered digitally and how information can be done. Even with DP Solutions, we use a product called Auvik. You know, it used to be in the past when we had a network issue for a client, maybe someone saying, I plugged into the wall and the internet connection's not working, I'm not able to connect, that we would have to send somebody on site, go physically examine the switch. Well, one of the things that Auvik does for us is it tells us, well, this is the port that we're not getting communications on. We're avoiding a lot of the in-person and physical interactions that we used to do because we have a device that tells us the information we need. So we're going to see more of that stuff in the future, and it's really a question of applicability to a specific business. Why does it matter? So I sort of teased a little bit about this earlier. Consumers now have really low patience for challenging tasks that are low value. Do you really want to mail in a bill, or do you want to pay it online? Again, speaking for myself, I think there's one thing that I have to pay, that I have to write a check for. I have a checkbook I have the same, I think, 50 checks that I I got from the bank several years ago, and I seldom use them. Everything is online. My Baltimore Gas and Electric, my mortgage, all of this stuff is online. And if I was working with somebody now and they said, yeah, you know what, send me a check in the mail, I would be mystified. Why can't I do this online? Why can't I do this electronically? Why do I have to deal with this nonsense of paper? Consumers just don't have patience for this, and they will say, well, it's such a pain in the butt and this place does it easier. Let's see what we can do. Manual and no-tech processes really provide no flexibility and limits productivity. Getting back to the check deposit example, when I used to deposit checks, I would have to go to the bank, I'd have to get in line, I had to fill out a form, I had to put the numbers in, I had to make sure it was signed, and I have terrible handwriting, so I have to make sure that people could read what I had to say. And it took like 15 minutes to deposit a expense check for my gasoline or something like that I would use when I was hitting the road. And that really impacts my productivity. More to the point, how do you deal with paper when your staff is working from home? I mean, we have to have digital services that address this. Change for anything that is happening is really more rapid than ever before. I think business, you could look at the COVID as a situation as an example. Everybody had to pivot their business immediately once states started locking down and shutting down. And even still, even as places sort of quote unquote open back up, there's still rapid change that needs to occur. And this all has to be done digitally. It's much easier to deal with these changes when you have a digital baseline. When everything is done digitally, you don't have to have people in person touching things as much. Perhaps the most important thing is, a lot of small businesses have exit plans. They want to merge, they want to sell. Maybe the doctor, the owner of the practice wants to retire or something like that. Your posture as it pertains to going digital, being engaged in digital transformation will impact the value of your business. So let's, two businesses that provide the same service equally, that have the same products and services, perhaps they're commoditized. One of them is very much paper run, manual processes, physical, non-technical, and the other is digitally transformed. They're really using a lot of technology. You can merge data very easily, et cetera. The second business, the one that has that digital transformation, will be valued more. And I know for a lot of small businesses, that's something you need to start thinking about, because nobody's going to want to take on an acquisition that is done with where the acquisition itself is very difficult because we're behind the times when it comes to tech and digital. So it's really important. Consider these things before you sort of dismiss the stuff out of turn. Where do you stand? Before you really get into any kind of posture and look at how can we take our business and evolve it digitally, we have to really do an evaluation of our organization. So the first question I would ask, and there are a lot of questions, but the first question I would ask is, how do you work with your customers? So what is the process to deliver and provide a product or service? What kind of feedback do you receive from your customers when you provide this service? Are they really happy with it? Is it time consuming? Do clients are there areas of the delivery that are annoying for the customer? I talked about the billing example. Is everything really positive, except you have a hard time getting the bill paid and you have to get all these people involved? Those are the types of things that we have to look at as areas of attacking for digital transformation. Perhaps more importantly, where are you experiencing the pain, cost, or difficulty when it comes to operating your business? So when you look at this, oftentimes some of the areas of greatest difficulty have to do with the old ways of working. Again, taxes are a really great example. It's a pain in the butt to get all these documents together, sift through them, et cetera. But if you go on TurboTax and you do this stuff and you input a few numbers, like what was in this field and that field, all of the data just comes over. It clears up a lot of bottlenecks. It saves a lot of time and energy. And so I would say is back up a second and say, well, what are the things that my business struggles with? And I would guess, and maybe not all the time, but I would guess a lot of those struggles probably have to do with old processes. Those are the things we have to attack first, and chances are there is a technology solution out there that can address those weaknesses, and we can see return on investment on a digital transformation in the future by addressing that stuff. This is a really, really important one, which is how does your staff view technology? So I think you have to take a survey of your team. Do you have kind of an old school mindset? Do people hate their computers? Do they not like mobile devices? Do they feel that technology gets in the way? Do they see technology as an essential tool that they value, or is there negativity towards it? Because you have to have a positive culture in order to get this done. If buy-in is one of the most, excuse me, buy-in is one of the most important things about digital transformation, and we want to drop the barriers, which I'm going to talk about in the next slide, to get people to want to go with digital transformation, and not just that, get their input on what their concerns are before we begin this digital transformation. So we're going to talk a little bit about culture later in the slide deck, but it's really critical that the staff have a positive view of technology and what it can do for them and the business. Let's shift a little bit. So now that we've sort of looked at the organization, we've evaluated where we stand, we've asked ourselves a few questions about what kind of organization are we, what sort of our challenges are right now, where the opportunities may exist for digital transformation. It's important to say, well, what are the things that are getting in the way of us taking a process and making it digital? And so I came up with a few barriers right here. Again, like with any of these slides, there's more things that I didn't include. You know, we only have so much time, and if you have questions about this stuff, please don't hesitate to put it in the chat, because we will be talking about this stuff later at the end. But let's talk about a few of these barriers. So a big one today is internet speed and connectivity. So this is something we can talk a lot about, because most organizations utilize some kind of broadband connection, but maybe they're not getting enough bandwidth, or they have other connectivity issues. Maybe it's unreliable. Maybe there's that tree that keeps hitting the line and it takes us down every time there's a storm. Maybe somebody's chewing up bandwidth because they are streaming video. They're watching, Netflix while we're working, and so that's getting in the way of productivity. Perhaps as people decentralize and they're working from home, 80% of your staff has sufficient internet connections, but some of them are in rural areas where maybe DSL, which is not as fast, is available, or maybe they don't have a good internet connection at all, or they're using satellite, or some of these other technologies that maybe have limitations. So we really have to do a survey and say, well, how much internet speed do we have? What kind of connectivity do we have? And how is that going to impact potential technology changes we put into place? So that's a really important thing to review. Devices. So one of the beautiful things about cloud computing and other technology tools is that in 2020, more products and services are becoming platform independent. So whether you're a Mac person, I really love my MacBook, or a Windows PC person, or you like to use a tablet or an Android device or whatever, usually those devices will work with modern technology solutions. They build these platforms with that in mind, but not always. Sometimes there are licensing concerns or technical limitations. More to the point, you might find that some of these devices are old, that even if the platform is technically working, that we have devices where there are security concerns because they're not supportable anymore. You want to do digital transformation and get all these apps and do all this new stuff, but you're running a Windows 7 device, which fundamentally cannot be secured as well as a Windows 10 device, or you're using an old iPhone where the app is no longer supported in the App Store. Things like that. We have to figure out what people are actually using, so that before we make a change, that people can actually connect with it. This could lead to some failures. And spoiler alert, I'm actually going to be putting out a video shortly about we're going to script now about why technology implementations fail. And one of the things we're going to talk about is really not understanding the landscape of where things are at. Infrastructure. So oftentimes you'll look at a small business and things will be working for what they do now, and everything will be functional, but the cabling in the walls is really old. Maybe it's running 10/100 Ethernet, which is not gigabit Ethernet. It's not really the same speed of the highway. Maybe the Wi-Fi connections are old and you can't get enough bandwidth or enough people connected on the same Wi-Fi connection, stuff like that. We need to make sure that the highways, that the landscape is sufficient to handle what's probably going to be increased traffic on local networks. The same thing goes for people on home networks. You know, if now you have people who are working from home and they were using, you know, before all they used their internet connection was to stream Netflix once in a while, but now, you know, the husband and wife are both working remotely connecting remotely to something or using a cloud service, plus their kids are doing Zoom meetings with their teachers or something. All of a sudden, that wireless access point that was good for what we were doing before is no longer really sufficient. So we really should look at infrastructure as a whole, and we may need to make some wholesale changes. Fortunately, you know, especially on the consumer level, but also in the business side, these things can be addressed. There's plenty of good products and services out there that can address these infrastructure concerns. I know there was concern earlier in the pandemic about availability of hardware, and there is still some concerns about that, but that seems to be clearing up a little bit as manufacturing seems to be getting a little bit more normal. But we do have to address infrastructure. Finally, compliance and security. So this may be a hard stop. So just because something can go digital, it may not be appropriate or legal. So it's great if we want to be able to share that document digitally back and forth with 1 million people all over the country or the planet. But if the document or the data is really sensitive, it may not be appropriate to use, for example, and I'm not trying to call out Google, but like Google Hangouts is probably not the best way to send a particularly sensitive document, you know, through people's home Google connections or something like that. We have to do this in a secure and compliant way, which may mean that we have to sort of trim our sails a little bit when it comes to digital transformation, or carve out special things that maybe don't quite go under a general digital transformation strategy. So we should look back, and I probably should have included this over the when I was asking on the landscape part, but we should look at what kind of data we're using and what our liabilities are as an organization as it pertains to compliance and security. That's going to be a really important one to address, especially in the future as compliance and security will become heightened as more data laws and data regulations start impacting businesses. So now that we've looked at all this stuff, let's come up with a strategy and how to look at coming up with a strategy. So as I said before, survey your people and your customers. So where do they see problems and why? And what are their views of technology? How do they look at us? What are they happy with? What are they not happy with? Where are the problems existing? And what are their views? If we can come up with a sense of where people see us and what their problems are, and like anything else, it's really more about perceptions than reality. You know, even though your paper process is efficient, maybe someone doesn't perceive it as efficient. It may mean we still want to change it. Remember, fundamentally, we're trying to create value here, which doesn't necessarily reflect reality. Take an inventory of your technology now, and do you really know what you have? You know, if you haven't done a general technology assessment where you do an overview of everything that you use, the devices in place, the infrastructure in place, internet connections, end-of-life stuff, the lifespan of your hardware in general. You know, for example, maybe things are okay now, but in the next year, a device is going to be end of life. We should really do an inventory so that we have a roadmap of where things need to go and what our expenses are going to be in regards to that, regardless of what kind of changes we're going to make. I think this is a really important one. So I call it use your intellectual resources to source solutions. So when you've identified these areas that you feel are an opportunity to digitally transform, there are lots of people out there. You know, DP Solutions is one of them. industry partners. Maybe you have friendly competitors or people within your industry that you network with who are similar. Software vendors who are trying to, who maybe exist in your own business. For example, we have a very positive relationship with a company called ConnectWise that provides us software. If we were looking for a new software solution, we might talk with ConnectWise, because ConnectWise is a trusted partner and they will tell us about some of the things that they know. Get good information from your intellectual resources about ways to solve these problems, because you'll be surprised at how many solutions are actually out there to address these issues. But it requires a lot of questions and utilizing the networks that we have. Another really important one is to participate in demos. So solution providers should be really amenable to demonstrations to show how these products might work for your business. A great example would be electronic medical records. So in medical practices, they started really evolving the number of medical records that were digitized. And what I would always tell people when they were getting an EMR is watch the demo, make them walk through everything that would happen for their practice, but also find out other organizations out there that are utilizing this product and ask them about their experiences. Ask them about what it was like when they integrated these products. Ask them what their barriers were, what their challenges were. Ask them how their people adapted to it. Ask them about training. A lot of these technology providers are going to have case studies or friendly environments where you can find out. You don't have to be the guinea pig. You can find out what is out there. I sort of spoke to this before. Ask for real life use cases. Customers are utilizing their products and talk to them about their experiences overall. I think that's really important. You don't want to be the first one that dives in unless you're willing to experience the pain that goes along with that. Another last and maybe most important, set the right expectation and take on chunks at a time. It's great to be ambitious. It's great to want to really transform things, but we also have to be realistic. People can only take on so much change at a time. There are going to be certain pieces of low-hanging fruit, if you will, that are the first things you'll want to address. You want people to understand that maybe there's going to be bumps along the road, but you'll want to have engagement with people so that they feel that you've listened to their needs and that you're there for them so that you can keep that culture positive. So don't go too far with it at once. Take on chunks, plan it out, use a calendar, use a roadmap so that you can kind of figure out where you can go with it and how much is reasonable at a time. Culture. So we're getting towards the end here, but culture is extremely important. Nothing works if the culture doesn't support it. People are the most important part of technology, which seems somewhat counterintuitive, but we need people to make this all happen. As I mentioned, it's very important when making technology changes. You want to figure out who in your organization are the champions, who are going to be the people on your team that make this successful, who are the people who are going to advocate this, who are going to be the people who, when there is a challenge or there is a problem, who are going to be the people who support those individuals and listen to their needs so that they feel like they're listened to and they still buy into things, and that they don't go around the lines when it comes to the technology stuff. We don't want people backsliding because they don't feel supported. So it's really important to have champions during this change. Let's say you have an organization of 20 people and you're trying to digitally transform and go to a piece of software that's going to change everything. Find 2 or 3 people who are going to be the advocates, who are going to handhold with people who are really excited about it and who can share that excitement with the rest of your team. If you do that, I think you'll find the whole experience to be a lot better. Recognize the legitimate concerns of individuals who are afraid of change. So I think anybody who's worked for any amount of time can probably think of a technology implementation that's failed or has been painful. When somebody shows resistance, you need to let them air it out. You need to let them speak to what their concerns are. Well, when we did this thing 5 years ago, We moved them email off to this service. My email didn't work for a week, and I lost all this data, and blah, blah, blah. You know, all the things that they say, I don't mean to blah, 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 but all the things that they say about this stuff that they experience, and say, hey, listen, Joe, or whatever, I understand where you're coming from. That's really unfortunate, and I know that stinks. So here's what we're going to do to address that. We're doing this, 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 and this. I've got Bill here who's going to support you in addressing this concern. I want you to know that we're addressing this stuff. What can I do to make this good for you? And just make them know that they're heard. If people feel like they're heard, they can tolerate, I think, a lot of challenges. I think when people feel ignored or blocked, I think they will backslide quickly. So the people part is super important. If we're not recognizing that, we're really going to face a failure, or we're going to face people who operate outside the lines and maybe create security concerns or independent actors or insider threats. So we want to avoid that as much as possible. So wrapping up before we do Q&A, I don't believe digital transformation is really an option. If we're not engaging in embracing change now, we're going to find ourselves uncompetitive in the future. I just don't think we can avoid this. We can't bury our heads in the sand on this stuff. So if you're really not thinking about this stuff now, you really should be. A successful return on investment for any kind of digital transformation requires business analysis, technical analysis, and people analysis. So we have to weigh all of these things. If you're making major changes without recognizing the factors of success, you're going to have these mismatches. You're going to find yourself going back. You're going to find yourself investing more money, rebuying solution, spending good money after bad, if you will. We don't want that to happen. We want people to plan this out and make this as pleasant as possible. Recognize that there's going to be bumps in the road, certainly, but that we have addressed it and we're having a positive overall experience. And again, I can't say this enough, but developing culture is really, really critical. We want a culture where people buy into this stuff, where people know that their concerns are going to be addressed and that they're going to be listened to and they're going to get what they need at the end of the day. So that's it for the prepared content. We're going to do some Q&A. While you guys are submitting questions, I'll talk a little bit about our next webinar in July. We're going to talk about how to run a virtual meeting. And when this is more of a sort of skills thing, I do a lot of virtual meetings. I do webinars, I do demonstrations, I do a lot of stuff digitally, and I find that I'm pretty successful with this stuff. But I know a lot of people have difficulties. Maybe their audio is not good. Maybe they don't know how to share things. Maybe they don't know what tools they can use. I'm going to do a webinar where we're going to talk all about making your virtual meetings successful, how to present well, how to be professional, and things like that, so that when you decide, when you're dealing with your clients and you want to have a virtual meeting, that you can really have an extremely positive experience, so that you can demonstrate that value to your customers. So I think it's really important, and I'm really looking forward to presenting on that topic. And with that, I'm going to pivot back to Jill. Jill, what kind of questions do we have?
Yes, thanks, Ben. Again, write your questions in the question box if you have any. We did have a couple come in. So the first one is, where's the best place for a business to start with digital transformation?
Sure. So it all is going to depend on the business. There's maybe no specific right answer here, but I would focus on a few things. I would focus on communications. So being able to do virtual meetings and presentations. If you can do that, you've already moved really very forward. And I do still see a lot of people having to use traditional conference lines or salespeople, for example, struggling because they haven't adjusted, for example, to the new reality of, you can't knock on doors, you can't do cold calling quite the way you were. Figure out what you can do on that side. Figure out where you can be paperless. Figure out how to submit documents digitally. Start with that low-hanging stuff. And not only are those things the most easiest things to address, but I think they'll also lower resistance from people who are maybe skeptical or maybe having a hard time with this stuff. You know, once you get a few successes under the belt and you find those easy things to address, then people will be less hesitant when you take more ambitious steps towards digital transformation. So that's kind of how I'd approach it. It's going to be different for each individual. So again, if you want, I would certainly encourage you to have follow-up conversations with us about your specific situation, and we can give you some guidance. Maybe even if it's not something we can help you with directly, we have a lot of partners that we feel can help on very specific things that maybe aren't our expertise. So that's kind of where I would start. Again, the low-hanging fruit, the things that are easiest to address, or the things that are the most painful for individuals.
Okay, great. Thanks, Ben. Our next question is, what are the barriers that usually block the path to transformation?
Yeah, I talked a little bit about this before, but internet connectivity is a big one, and not having the right devices. You know, I know some people are very negative about smartphones and tablets. You know, there are certainly privacy concerns. I know there's an old school way of thinking, which I don't want to. This is all legitimate. I understand people's nostalgia, but everybody needs to have good internet connections. Everybody needs to have good supportable devices. People should know the basics about how to use these devices. We should give people crash courses in functionality and how to do basic things. Now is a really good time if you have people on your staff that are maybe, you know, I don't want, nobody needs to be a technology expert. You know, nobody needs to be an IT technician or something like that. But I think you want to have your people in a position where they really know how to navigate a computer and do the basics. You might consider doing something like, if someone's really having a hard time with basic computing skills, maybe giving them a little bit of tutorials. And I know that's something you have to tread gingerly on, because I know people are sensitive to these things. But I think giving people some basic skill sets will really help. Such as learning, attending our webinar next month about how to run a virtual meeting. You know, giving people some basic skills so they know how to get the most out of their technology. One of the things we're also working on at DP Solutions right now is we're doing some training videos about other sort of skill set things that people can do, like keyboard shortcuts or using multiple screens and things like that. We want to, one thing you can really do to remove those barriers is to sort of upgrade some basic skill sets. And it doesn't require that much energy, it doesn't require that much effort, and there are so many solutions out there, even just YouTube, to find ways to do some basic computing things. That's kind of where I would start. Those are some of the barriers I would look at, is infrastructure, internet connectivity, the devices, and then the people themselves, you know, making sure that people are mentally prepared to deal with these things.
All right, good tips. Thank you. All right, we did have one more question. How do we know if our transformation was successful, and how can we measure it?
You just have to sort of look at the before and after. I mean, like anything else, we have to have metrics in place to sort of see what the challenge was. So when we're starting our process on digital transformation, the first thing we have to look at is what our business problems are. And we have to measure things like, well, how long did this process take? How much time are we investing? How many people had to touch this thing? How frustrating was it? One great thing to do is to do surveys. We use SurveyMonkey for surveys to our customers about how their experiences were. If you're not doing surveys already, I think that's a really great thing to start with, especially because it's easy to do and inexpensive. But ask around and ask people, you know, what their pain points are. And then once you feel like you've addressed them or made progress towards them, maybe what you do afterwards is send them a follow-up survey. You know, we made this change. You know, we moved to this new CRM in the cloud because of X, Y, and Z. You know, we wanted to have better interaction with our customers. We wanted to store our data better, and we wanted to integrate our email or whatever it is. How do you feel that this change impacted your job? Do you think it made things more efficient for you? Did it make your life easier? What did it free you up to do other activities? Stuff like that. Some of these things can be measured simply with dollars and cents. You know, we used to spend X number of dollars every month on photocopying stuff, and now we're not because we're using this digital solution. That's something that can be useful to measure. It all kind of depends on what the challenge is that we're addressing, but if you identify what that challenge is up front, we can probably create metrics that we can measure either with surveys or actual hard numbers that can measure the success of it and go from there.
Okay, and I don't think that we have any more questions, so we can go ahead and wrap up.
All right, great. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. As always, you can see my contact information on the screen. I'm happy to have any kind of side conversations with anyone. Please feel free to reach out to us, and please register for future webinars. Check out the security tips, check out our blogs. We're trying to do tons and tons of content, especially now that people are remote and they need more information than ever before, and we want to be there to help. So thanks again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you all again real soon.